It felt great to get behind the podcast microphone again. I've had some great conversations with some really engaging and dynamic people in the continuous improvement community, and I'm excited about sharing the upcoming episodes. Today's episode is with Stephen J. Spear. Stephen is the author of the book The High Velocity Edge and is a multiple Shingo Research Prize winner. He helped develop and deploy the Alcoa Business System. He's a senior lecturer at the MIT Sloan School of Management and is a senior fellow at the Institute for Healthcare Improvement. He is also a founder of a consulting firm built on the tenets of his book. Steve and I had a great conversation that actually turned into a two-part interview. This week, we'll talk about Steve's early experiences with lean and continuous improvement. And then next week, we'll talk about two papers that Stephen has recently released that talk about accelerating innovation and succeeding in periods of abrupt change. Here's part one of our interview. Okay, we're with Stephen J. Spear on the podcast. Steve is the author of the award-winning and critically acclaimed book, The High Velocity Edge. He's a senior lecturer at the MIT Sloan School of Management and a senior fellow at the Institute for Healthcare Improvement. He's also a founder of a consulting firm built on the tenets of his books and C2Solve Corp, which is and we're going to talk about, but it's a new software company that's around business processes. But Steve, I can read an intro, but you're probably the best person to tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, what you do, and how lean and continuous improvement is a part of your life.
Yeah, all within 30 seconds too, right?
Yeah.
So just quick reflection. We can pick this up anywhere you want. I'm sort of accidental to this. I didn't study engineering or manufacturing in college. My first jobs were I had my first job worked for an investment bank. Second job I worked for a congressional agency, and I was kind of like bookwormy, nerdy stuff that way. And the thing was, this was all in the late 1980s. And, if you think about the formative influences on my life, so, born in the 60s, living through the 70s, into the Reagan era, the big dominant things in the back of your head all the time, the existential threat of the Cold War. And wouldn't you know, the Soviet Union collapsed under its own sort of ineptitude and weight. And so you think, oh, well, that's, good opportunity to sort of, let everyone breathe easier. But then there was this existential threat coming from foreign competitors. And I was like, I thought we got to relax after the Cold War, but that wasn't the thing. You had these storied American companies which had decades and decades of great success disappearing: RCA, U.S. Steel, Bethlehem Steel, et cetera. And so I got really curious as to what the heck was going on, particularly with these Japanese companies. And as we later discovered, I mean, not me, but the larger community discovered, a very few of Japanese companies were really, really good at what they were doing. I got curious as to finding out what they were doing that set them so far apart in terms of their ability to deliver value that was, wildly appreciated in the market. And just through, a series of happy coincidences and good luck, is that when I was applying for graduate school, the dean at the MIT Sloan School at the time, this guy Lester Thoreau, he repurposed the school. If you look at the mission of a lot of business schools, like, oh, we're going to create leaders in this thing and that and teach leadership. And basically he boiled it down to, we're going to beat Japan. And if you're really interested in that as a problem, then come to the Sloan School and we'll cut you slack. We'll let you take whatever course you want, go to whatever other part of the institute you want. If you can figure out some interesting question for which an answer would be useful. And so that's how I got into this Japan stuff and Toyota stuff and lean stuff. It was kind of those series of anxiety prompts and these fantastic opportunities that just happened to be there for me.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you being on the podcast today, and I'm sure the listeners and the viewers are going to be appreciative of the insights and some of the things that you've picked up along the way. Before we get started in the interview, I always ask all of our guests to share with us a quote or a mantra from a favorite leader. And if you could also share with us why you chose that quote.
Yeah. So not a widely known guy, but when we started getting curious about Toyota, this would have been about 1995, 96. And when I say we, I'm referring to this Professor Kent Bowen. The guy's a freaking genius. He he had a full career as a material scientist at MIT, retired, and then went over to Harvard Business School and had a full career there and retired emeritus there too. I mean, the guy is a genius. But anyway, in terms of our work together, here it was about 10 years into the lean movement, right? And everyone understood that lean Toyota, they kind of use those terms synonymously. You had the machine that changed the world, lean thinking, you know, global production system at GM, or global management system, whatever they call it, Ford production system, Chrysler operating system. And with all this effort, there was no second Toyota. And so Kent Bowen and I, Professor Bowen and I, got interested in the question of why not? What did people miss? Anyway, the Toyota folks, it turned out when we approached them, they said, well, we're willing to let you learn. But the way we teach everybody is this very immersive way. I mean, for those who remember the movie, this is like Karate Kid, wax on, wax off, um, and paint up, paint down, Daniel. And so my Mr. Miyagi, or my Yoda, whatever movie metaphor you want to use, was this guy, Oba, Hajime Oba. And I remember Oba's attitude with me was, don't think, do. And just to unpack that a little bit, where this first started, I was in the office, which is unusual working for Toyota. Normally you're in a plant, but occasionally I'd have to come back to the office to check in, have a meeting, I don't know, restock on pencils, whatever. It's in the office. And he'd see me sitting at a desk. And he said, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm trying to solve a problem, Mr. Oba. He says, it looks like you're just sitting there. And I said, yeah, well, I'm thinking this problem through. And then he'd come back and says, why are you still here? I said, well, this problem, I've been thinking about it. He said, by third time, why are you still here? I said, it's a hard problem. I didn't get the answer yet. And finally he'd stop by and say, look, stop thinking, start doing. I said, what do you mean? He said, no, just, and then and finally he kicked me out of the office. But I didn't really understand what he meant by that. And then it hit upon me that this was just basically a really comprehensive view about how we get things better, which is, if we have a problem, basically the reason we have a problem is we don't understand a situation and how to manage it. And so if we sit there thinking, what are we doing? We're taking all the data we already had, all the information we already had, all the interpretive lenses we already had, and these are the things that got us to have the problem in the first place. And so now what we're doing is we're taking exactly the same stuff that helped create the problem, and we're trying to reapply them. Well, I think Einstein said something like this: if you keep doing that, it's a sign of insanity, right? Not surprisingly, if all we do is think, we're going to take the same data, same information, same interpretive lens, and get to the same problem. And Oba's attitude about not thinking, doing, he didn't want you to go willy-nilly, but it was basically this. He said, if you have a problem, basically it means you have a situation you don't understand. The reason you don't understand it is your data's inadequate, your information's inadequate, or your interpretive lenses are inadequate. If you do something, you're going to either get more data or you're going to get more information, or you're going to get different perspective. And it's only through the doing, through the exploration, through the experimentation, that you can actually discover your way to an answer. Now, the reason I pick on that don't think, do is such a profoundly important thing is it don't think, do, right? What is that? 3 words. But in those 3 words, it captures such a dichotomy in terms of how we think about what leaders do. Because so much of what we think leaders do, and we write about it, we teach it, this is how we educate in MBA programs very often, is we think that leadership or management is a deliberative craft. That, I sit there and because, I'm senior to you or you're senior than me, whoever's the most senior, he gets or she gets the richest, most relevant data. And they sit there and they process it. And if it's hard data, they get, bigger, more fancy tools to process it. And then they make it a pronouncement based on their processing of this data. That's how we educate people to think that's what you're training to do, to be this deliberative data processor. But again, tying this back to unknown situations or problematic situations, it's very likely that we don't have the data because the situation is new, or the situation, we didn't understand which data to even collect in the first place. And certainly, even if we have the data, we don't know what to do with it. And so Mr. Oba's 3 words, don't think, do, reflected such a profoundly different worldview of how we make ourselves better. Anyway, he asked about quotes. I'll go with that one. And then I'll throw on to that also is it sounds very patriotic, but I actually find great meaning in it. Our founding documents would say, everyone's created equal. And I think that ties into our conversation about lean. And it's not just sort of empty flag waving. I mean, we had Patriots Day the other day in Massachusetts, so we should wave the flag. But you think about the basic premise there, which is if you take this idea of don't think, do, and then you tie it on to everyone's created equal, then it answers the next question. Well, who should be doing the thinking and who should be doing the doing? The answer is everyone. That everyone has some opportunity, some potential to create value. And it's not just this rarefied set of elitists, with whatever their privileges. When we talk about privileges today, sometimes it gets a little bit hyperbole, but it's fair, right? Because it reflects an attitude that is contradictory to our sort of canonical documents, which say all are created equal. And so here you have this guy Oba, who's saying, "Don't think, do," as a way of living, a way of expressing one's potential. And then what I start to observe through him is that even though he grew up in Japan and worked for Toyota, and his time in the United States was a small portion of his much longer life, um, he said, and it should be everyone who has the opportunity to do and think and create. So, you know, there's not
That's
very many words, but
yeah, well, but really, it's the best part about it is that it's simple, right?
simple,
It's
right?
easy, applicable, and I think that that ties in with what I've seen in my career at different times where people hold process improvement or hold process ownership to a certain few, or they hold information to a certain few, and as you've written about in your books and as in your papers, it's sharing of information and making things transparent and making everybody feel like they're part of the solution is a competitive advantage
Right.
if you use it properly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, Chris,
um
100% on that. Look, I think there's moral, ethical reasons to think this. I think there's also just sort of, good, solid control theory behind this. Is that systems that depend on central processors and central control. I mean, really to the extreme, they're they run the risk of becoming monolithic, homogeneous, but also they're very brittle. And the reason they're very brittle is that they're at risk of, if not single points of failure, few points of failure. On the other hand, systems that have distributed problem solving, they're um, they're less homogeneous. They're less and they're less brittle. They're more resilient and also more agile. And so, when we start thinking through how we want to live and how we want to influence others, we really start having choices here in terms of, what values do we subscribe to? Do we subscribe to, all are created equal? All right. Well, that leads you down in a particular direction. If we don't subscribe to that, that leads you in a very different direction. And then you start running into these contradictions, which is, come the 4th of July on Independence Day, you're waving a flag and singing this song and that song and having your hot dog and your beer. Yay, yay, Declaration of Independence, but then you don't live that. And my question is, do you truly believe it? And if you truly believe it, why aren't you living it wholly? And if you believe it, it applies here, and you don't believe it applies here, that really becomes kind of difficult to sustain. Everyone's created equal, but not here.
yeah.
Everyone's created equal, um, but not under these circumstances. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
we want everybody to share with us their problems that they're having at work, except for this set over here, or don't tell us
right.
about this one. So it's
Yeah.
yeah, it applies in life, and it applies in the as most things do. The things that apply in our life outside of work also apply very well inside of work. So
Yeah, and they
uh,
should in both directions, right? They should in both
absolutely.
directions. Yeah.
So, Stephen, you told us about how you end up in this environment where you're learning at Toyota, like from Toyota folks.
Yep.
Um, at what point does it click for you and says, "Man, I am doing what I'm supposed to be doing"? I mean, how does that is there an aha moment, or is there something that that sticks with you that says, "Man, I'm doing the right thing right now in the right place"?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think along the way there were a couple of those kind of moments. I mean, look, there were the first ones where when I started doing this immersion at Toyota in 1996 or so, I had no idea what was going on, and so there were those aha moments of like, oh, it's starting to come together. I mean, one of those I remember looking at a place called Summit Polymers in Georgetown, Kentucky, standing on a catwalk, looking at these material handlers move back and forth Kanban cards in one direction and parts and components and raw materials in the other. And I'm watching this, and that's when it hit me. In my book, I talk a lot about the importance of designing work to see problems. Specification plus built-in tests is, I think, how I phrase it. And I remember standing on that catwalk at Summit Polymer and realized these people have figured out how to design a management system basically with switches built in. That if there's a need, click. If there's a response, click on, click off. But if there's a failure in that connection, there's another switch that gets flipped to say there's a problem here that needs attention. And really, it was just this beautiful dynamic system that was naturally self-regulating, self-stabilizing, um, self-pacing, self-synchronizing. It was like, whoa. So in terms of the aha moments, um, in terms of understanding what was going on, I think that one really comes to mind. There's and then this is a dynamic system. We have to think about this as an approach for managing a dynamic system, and not just sort of a static insert a tool here, insert a tool there. It's not anyway. That's one. The other, in terms of kind of the realization that this is really important. So I did my immersion at a first tier supplier to Toyota Georgetown. It was a stamping plant. And as we went through the simplifying of flows, the increase in the increase in the speed of changeover times, you could see things happen like the reduction in inventory. I mean, this was they had stuff in heavy bins stuck on shelves, and by the time changeover times went from like 2 hours to a handful of minutes, um, all the inventory they needed was stacked waist high in cartons on the floor. And you start looking at this and say, well, what a better place to work. You don't have to worry about getting run over by a high low. You don't have to worry if you're driving the high low that something's going to fall off the shelf on you. Just need like a little hand cart. Oh, I need another box of parts. Boom, I get it. There was this reduction in risk. And then the other part was it was becoming easier and easier for people to do something that was valued by someone else. Kanban card comes in from Toyota or one of the other customers, and the person in shipping knew with certainty, this guy named Hoppy, now that I remember, that Hoppy could go over exactly where he thought it would be. Boom, there's the box of parts. He doesn't have to chase around. He doesn't have to order expediting, get something onto a production hot list. It was there. And when he went to pick it up, he could say to this lady who worked in welding, Sophie, thank you. Um, that's what I needed. And what did you know? You had it. And she could go back to the guy in stamping when she needed something, and boom, what did you know? So this combination of reduction in risk, increase in productivity, and increase in appreciation, and being appreciated, it was like, damn, that's good. And I'd have to say that was like a real pivot for me. And then there were these other opportunities as we started working with Alcoa or working in hospitals and healthcare and whatnot. You'd see like this is a really remarkable way to manage these very, very complex dynamic work systems in a way that made it so much more possible for people to do something with certainty that they would succeed and with confidence that what they did mattered to someone else. And I think you and a lot of other people would appreciate how or relate to how uncommon those feelings of satisfaction, appreciation, how uncommon they are in so many workplaces. And I think what we've seen is those negative feelings, they're completely unnecessary. Anyway, yeah.
No, I think, and you've touched on it in your book, and it's that people, leaders, where they fail is they see lean or the Toyota production system as the
Right,
artifacts
right.
of a business process, when it's really a people system. It's really
Yeah,
it's all about the people, and
right.
how they function in the ecosystem of business.
Yep. Yep. To that point, there was this guy, Norman Bodek, Bodek. And Norman was, I'd say, a management idea prospector. That back in, I think even in the 70s, he heard things were going on in Japan. He didn't know what was going on, but he went over there to start asking people, what are you reading? What are you talking about? And he created a publishing house and started bringing over, like, so we know about Shingo because of Norman. We know about this thing because of Norman. And he was the first one to introduce the English-speaking world to Taiichi Ono with this 1988 translation of Ono's 78 treatise on the Toyota production system. And the thing about, and this is picking up what you were saying, is if you read through this book, and as I read it, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago when I first picked it up, I thought it was going to be about production control algorithms, the movement of material through machinery. And now that I'm a little older, a little wiser, maybe more patient, I reread this book the other day. Norman passed away some weeks ago. And so I thought, sort of as a tribute to Norman, I would start reading some of his product. And so anyway, I started rereading Ono, and it's a book of philosophy. It's just philosophy, because he keeps coming back to, why do we do these things? Because we realized we had a situation where someone couldn't do something valuable. Why do we do these things? Because we realized we had people in situations where they were at risk. Why do we do these things? Because we realized people's needs were being delayed in their satisfaction. And over again, Ono, it's wild because you think about his formative years, right? He was a manager in an engine plant. I mean, that's pretty material and machinery intensive. And then he became sort of this wise leader within Toyota, but that's also a lot of material, a lot of machines. And you go through his book, and he's talking about how people feel, how they relate to each other, and what he as a senior leader does or can do to shape those experiences. And yeah, I think if we go back and we look at Deming, and I don't know if Deming and Ono ever had any meaningful interaction. Deming also, I think, gets misunderstood because Deming, people interpret that also as all these PDCA and control charts. If you look at Deming, he basically says the environment in which people work can be better or worse, and it's on leaders to determine whether it's better or worse. And then he goes on and says, and what does better or worse mean? He comes down to is that, like, are we creating a situation in which people can create profound knowledge or not? And if they can, that's better, and if they can't, that's worse. And it's on leaders to shape that environment. It's sort of a harsh judgment, but also on the other hand, I think both Ono and Deming offer a very optimistic expression.
So you mentioned Alcoa. So you've learned what you've done so you've learned the Toyota production system from an immersion standpoint, and where a lot of people go and look for examples that validate their thoughts and say, "See, I told you over there." You guys took a different approach, trying to find companies. You were trying to make it not work somewhere, and
Right.
yeah, and which is really robust scientific thinking. But so now you take probably the furthest example from an automotive manufacturing example to Alcoa with steel. Can you talk about that a little bit, about your experiences there, and the what you learned about the application of the principles in different environments?
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, so Alcoa certainly is a step away from the discrete part, high variety, low volume. No, I'm sorry. The high volume, low variety, continuous flow production of Toyota. How did one of my mentors phrase it? Is assembled fabricated parts. He was once writing a case study where he couldn't identify who was writing about it. It had to be an automaker. So he said it's a manufacturer of assembled fabricated parts. And Alcoa is pretty far from that. I mean, their processes are driven as much by chemistry and physics as they are by mechanics. And their parts aren't fabricated, and nor are they assembled, most of them. The work environment is really quite different from Toyota. But that's, so you might think that if you look at the Toyota production system as lean tools, in that environment, where do you even put a Kanban card? And where do you put continuous flow where there are no, very often no conveyor belts? But by that point, when we started working with Alcoa, we had come to appreciate with Toyota this idea that every situation you're in, whatever your mastery of it, you still bring into that situation misunderstanding. And one of the things that really struck me about Toyota is how this combination of declaring how you were going to do something, but then building in a test to refute your beliefs. What they were effectively doing was turning everything into a bona fide experiment. And now you start thinking the wisdom of that, right? Because from a control perspective, getting a quicker feedback rather than slower is good for adjustment and course correction. From a scientific perspective, finding out sooner rather than later that your basic assumptions are false, that's better than worse. I mean, just as a sort of a digression, for folks who are really kind of interested in that, converting everything into an experiment, I think I really dig into those themes in chapters 6 and 7 of my book. The 6 is how do you design things so they'll tell you you're wrong, and then chapter 7 is when you find out you're wrong, how do you solve a problem? And there are a lot of really cool. I think there are 3 case studies in there about quality circles, which really tie into. And if you're solving a problem, make sure it's an every body approach rather than just a few approach. Anyway, tying this back to Alcoa. So what we realized is that when we went into Alcoa, the issue wouldn't be the literal transplantation of tools. It had to be the introduction and the reinforcement of the mindset, and getting people to treat everything as an opportunity to either succeed or get feedback from which you learn, as opposed to succeed and fail. And anyway, that's been kind of a continuing theme, which is whether it's Toyota over here with fabricated assembled parts, or Alcoa with these huge heavy industrial processes, or over in healthcare where it's largely knowledge work and most of the work is conceptual, not physical. That no matter where you land, you have this choice. Do you convert the work into a succeed or fail opportunity, or a succeed and learn opportunity? And the lesson we took from Toyota is, there's no limit to our ability to convert experiences into succeed and learn.
So when we talked a little bit about this in our pre-conversation beforehand,
Hmm.
when it comes to continuous improvement, pet peeves that you see being done wrong or applied incorrectly, um, that thought of tools versus people, or it's just a set of tools. Can you
Yep.
talk about that for a minute?
Yeah. So in terms of pet peeves, you see too often people who their experience actually managing stuff is cursory, or if it wasn't cursory, it was framed by this attitude that what a manager does, or a leader, however you want to phrase that, um, they expedite, they somehow firefight. It's actually, it's funny because on the one hand, it can lend to almost abusive kind of behavior, but it's also very reactive behavior. It's not it's funny, right? The person who feels that he or she is most in charge, it's actually least in charge because they're always running around reacting to some provocation. Um, it's not a very emotionally healthy state of being, right? Anyway,
No.
um, but in terms of folks like that, they may think that oh, if I just execute one more transaction and buy one more thing, um, I'll be liberated from this. And I think the thing they miss, and this is a big pet peeve for me, is that this is fundamentally guidance for how to manage the collaboration of many people towards some common purpose. And instead of focusing on the material and the machines, right? Because people show up and they try to do something, and they may do something using a machine, working through a machine onto a piece of material, but that's just an expression of their intent. And what you really want to do, or what you really should do, is look for situations that compromise people's best efforts. Um, where are they confused? Where are they at hazard? Where are they at risk? Where are they threatened? Um, Where is their time needlessly spent? And if you can start with that and look for situations that'll make associates more productive by returning time to them, returning stability to them, returning certainty to them, you're much better off. Now, look, I say that in terms of convictions based on experience, but also, you know, I'll go back to Taiichi Ono on this one. So, when people talk about lean and tools, they say, "Oh, we've got all these tools to eliminate waste." Now, first of all, Ono didn't think the purpose of the system was eliminating waste. It's like right in the beginning of his book, which I'll hold up again so people don't forget the name and the title, right? It's hard
We'll
to
put a
forget the
link in the
title,
show
Toyota,
notes. Yeah.
right? Toyota Production System, right? It's hard to forget the name. He says the whole point is deliver value to a customer, right? And they're going to reward you by paying you for whatever you deliver. So if you could do that better, faster. Now, as far as waste, Ono is not in the business of eliminating waste for the sake of eliminating waste. He says wastes are what slow you down. Now, the other thing I want to keep going with Ono is that when he talks about waste, he's not talking about material waste, machine waste, financial waste. He's talking about the waste of people's potentials. And in fact, he says, so for example, this waste of transportation. Well, why is it jazz Ono? Because you could have been doing something that someone else appreciated, but instead you're walking over here and you're walking over there for something. And without going through all of them, it's interesting. Ono, when he's very clear about which his least favorite waste is, the one that really jazzes him the most. And I'll let you listeners think about this a second. Of the seven, the way Ono, it's overproduction. And you start thinking overproduction. That's kind of funny. I mean, all right. So let's say I make 5 red things and I only need 3 today, but maybe I'll get rid of the other 2 tomorrow. And Ono comes back and says, no, that's bad thinking. He said, if you made those 2 extra, you spend time doing something which no one cares about. And he says, as a manager, why do I have a right to ask someone to do something which has no point? And he says, now all these other ways we can clean up and give, but he says, how demeaning is it to say, and you start looking at all this other stuff, like the stuff about, someone, having this autonomic approach to designing machines so they can run unobserved. And sort of the person who's thinking of sort of superficial transactional financial level says, oh yeah, well, I want the machine to be reliable. I want the machine to be dependable. And he says, he doesn't disagree with that. I wouldn't say he says, no, but he says, hold on, you're thinking about this wrong. Why would I tell someone that I think so little of him or her that I'm going to ask them to sit there and watch a machine? I mean, it's like so insulting. So anyway, pet peeve is, look, we show up at work because, we have our own personal reasons, but the reason work exists is that there are situations which can't be resolved by individuals. It's a team, solving problems is a team sport. And this is a management system which really gives you a lot of guidance on how to play that team sport much more successfully than not. And so back to the pet peeves is people forget that teams are composed of players and players are people. Now, depending on the sport, they have different equipment. Might be a rod, it might be a stick, it might be an oar, racket, whatever. But the key part of the team is the players. And what Ono and these others are talking about is how to manage the team so the players are more productive at what they set out to do.
I really appreciate Stephen for giving of his time to be a guest on the podcast. Make sure to check out the links on the show notes page. And if you want to be notified when new episodes come out, subscribe at our website, leanleadershippodcast.com. Make sure to catch next week's episode where we share the second part of Stephen's interview. Until then, seek progress over perfection. Thanks again.